Going to get started.
How many are
2 to 3
The 2035 West Quadrant Plan.
Central City?
restoration.
This is a work session. There will be no public testimony. We are going to go through the items and then hopefully make a recommendation. And following that, we will have the Green Infrastructure Panel a briefing. So, want to get started?
I will. And good afternoon. I'm Joe Zender with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And what we're going to do is a virtual PowerPoint till the PowerPoint comes back, but we can actually move forward even though the images aren't there. For the work session today, we have it structured in 4 parts if we can get through it, although we're starting late. First, we have 3 items for discussion that we've queued up for your discussion, and these were reflected in our briefing package. One is affordable housing, so it'll just really pick up on the discussion we just been having. Bridgehead Heights, and we wanted to just cycle back to review, or just to put on to mention the additional briefing materials we circulated on West End Heights. Then, second item is in the table that you had received in your package before, and you got a larger copy of today, there's all the changes that have been made up to now in the plan, and we wanted to create the opportunity if you wanted to talk about any of those, so we can pull those off. That's 2. 3, if we get there, it'd be great to have a vote on the amended plan so that we can move forward if we have time. And then 4th would be to talk about the transmittal letter. So first, I'm going to talk about affordable housing. In the packet that you
Go right back there.
It's like I never left. And I'm a land use planner. But Javier Mena from the Housing Bureau is here as well to help us through this part if necessary. Today we distributed a 2-page handout that says Central City 2035 Central City-wide housing and neighborhoods. So remember, in the packet that you have already received, there is that section where we pulled up things that we were finding in the quadrant plans that really should have been in the Central City-wide plan and put them there. And what we've done today is giving you back that housing and neighborhood section, and with the highlighted text being new goals and new policies that have reflected the discussions that Commissioner Baugh and I and the Housing Bureau have been having since your last hearing. I wanted to show it to you all sort of in one place so the story was a little more coherent. So let's just take a look at this handout. First, we added a goal, and that is goal H. And what that goal is, the general thrust of what you're going to see today was to respond to the issues that came up in our last discussion about a desire to have more concrete priorities set and goals set around the topic of affordable housing at different levels of affordability, if you remember that discussion. Part of the reason that we care about affordable housing is to meet our affordable housing needs. In the Central City, though, it's also to maintain the diversity of the Central City, and that's what Goal H reflects. So it's sort of getting the Central City plan in alignment with this direction that the Portland plan and the comprehensive plan went, and I mentioned that in response to Chris's earlier question. Then when you get down into the policies, if you look at 17, 18, and 19, that's sort of the heart of the matter of what we've been doing in the discussions over the last weeks. 17 is a policy version of making the statement about housing diversity and this idea of a range of housing types and households. 18 is something new entirely as well, but it is getting specific about our intentions around affordable housing and setting as a goal that 30% of the total housing in the Central City is affordable to households between 0 and 80 and a median family income. Today, in the PowerPoint, you would see that 54% of the housing in the Central City is affordable at that level today.
So we're out ahead of it.
34.
34.
See, I'm reading a reduction, so I'm sorry.
We're done.
34%. But as we just discussed, the ability to maintain that split is a big challenge. And the way this goal is particularly framed is we're looking at 30% across the entire central city. The way this goal is also framed is that as a whole, remember the central city is made up of these different parts. We're setting for ourselves a goal of hitting 30%. And in the central city, a big way that that housing affordability is provided is through housing preservation as well, because of existing older buildings that could be either converted or maintained as affordable housing. So it's maybe not the same everywhere, although the discussion we just had sort of implied that we may want to make it that way. But for this particular policy, it's 30% across the entire central city, 0 to 80%. And then the second part of this policy 18 is that we want to increase the supply of housing affordable to working households in the 50 to 80% median family income bracket. Now here, this is a new concept, but it is cleaning up some of the sloppier application of workforce housing thinking that we had in the plan before, and it was causing a great deal of confusion. And the argument around setting it at 50 to 80% MFI is this, that when you look at the household incomes that are associated with that level of that income bracket, it corresponds to also income that can be earned by positions that are often found in the central city. So that kind of retail job or there's a good proportion of that level of job that you're finding in the central city already. And in the Portland plan, if you remember, we made the case that when we talk about housing affordability, we really want to think about housing and transportation costs, because to the household, those are two public policy effective public cost of the household that public policy can make a difference about. And if you can save money on both, that's saving money for the household, improving affordability. And so our proposition is that, especially for this 50 to 80, this working household in the central city, if we're able to increase the supply of units in the central city in that cost bracket, we have leveraged a particular sort of savings for income savings for the households affected. In this, the way, so that's what the number policy 18 is saying, and it's getting very explicit about the affordability brackets that we're targeting and why. Today, the 0 to 80 corresponds to the priorities of the Portland Housing Bureau, so this is consistent with their policies. In practice, the policy also emphasizes providing housing for 0 to 30% MFI as a high priority, because it's impossible to those are people on the edge of homelessness. So it's a very critical group to house. The need is documented to be big. It takes public money to do it, so it's a priority. As you get above that, their programs do provide housing blended across that whole bracket as well. And we're making this new point about what we're calling the 50 to 80% MFI. And we're not calling it workforce housing because in the world of housing affordability, workforce housing's interpreted a bunch of different ways, and it's code language that creates a big issue. We're just trying to be explicit that we're talking about this. Yes, that's why we're not characterizing it differently.
Joe, I find that the concept of maintaining the 30% goal. Oh, sorry, I apologize. I find the concept of maintaining the 30% goal really compelling. We're at 34 right now, but when the private market picks up, the playing field tips and it goes the other way quickly. So this concept of kind of maintaining it on an annual basis is real important to me.
Right, and this policy that we're putting in the plan squarely puts in the plan the same challenge you all just made on North Mac. It's just, personally, I'm more comfortable talking about the whole central city than just North Mac, but I don't vote. And but it's consistent with what you just did. Can I tell you how we're going to maintain 30%? Can Javier do that right now? We cannot. No. Can we project that it's going to exceed our expected level of resources? I bet we can. But then the challenge is back to us to deal. And to find other ways to try to get there. And our whole work on housing bonuses and all of that talk about inclusionary housing, those are in the spirit of the kind of things that could come. But today, I I feel obliged to just represent, this is an aspirational goal, but it's reflective of the central city that we have today and is coming from not just meeting affordable housing needs, but maintaining housing diversity. 19, policy 19 is about where public money for affordable housing, from our affordable housing programs is targeted. And this is reflective, once again, of what I was just saying about Portland Housing Bureau priorities and practice. Actually, their programs go 0 to 60, but this is consistent with where the public money goes. The housing affordability to hit the 50, the goal we previously set absolutely is going to take public resources, but it may be additional resources as well. Clearly, additional resources need to be brought to it. The public housing funds that we have, that we spend through our programs and our tax incentives are 0 to 50.
And I just want to add, this is really focused when you look at it, 18 and 19, about.
Andre.
Mike.
This is really focused about production units, trying to maintain what we have, and how we look at funding. So it really kind of bifurcates, it separates out funding and where the funding should be, and then where production should be. And it is trying to achieve both. It's trying to say, we need to do both. You need to produce units, and we need to do funding.
And it puts on the table a sort of a more parsed kind of challenge, like we just talked about. 30% is one piece of it, and these income brackets are another.
So if I can try and understand this a little better, in the 0 to 50% category, how much of the Housing Bureau's resources really cover that range, and how much are targeted under 30%?
If I could ask Javier to join me. Here's actually a person who knows the answer.
Great.
There you go. In terms of percentages, it's for the goals that are associated in the plan, they're limited. I think that we haven't run the numbers as to how much we would definitely need in order to meet those goals, especially as we move forward. But it's a small percentage in terms of our own funding.
Right. So I guess my worry is that with your constrained funding, most of that will go to the 0 to 30% range, and the 30 to 50 won't get much attention. Is that a risk? Am I accurately perceiving that, or is there something I'm missing here?
Definitely in terms of our investments, our emphasis are on the most vulnerable, which tend to be families in 0 to 30, not necessarily the same. And however, in terms of our 0 to 30 investments, the cost to build a housing unit, it's the same regardless as to what population is going to be there. It's sustaining that. And so as we invest on a 0 to 30 household, we make sure that those projects are sustainable with subsidy associated with it. So it's not that we invest all of our resources, or we limit or direct all our resources on the 0 to 30. We want to make sure as we invest in those units that they're sustainable. So it's both. We try to do the whole gamut, especially, like I said, with vulnerable populations such as homeless and families.
Okay.
So, Chris, the way Javier explained it to me, which helped me understand it, was there's a imperative to really help that 0 to 30. And the way it works in a project, to get the project to pencil, means that they typically have to spread the unit across different levels of affordability, because it's a income subsidy for the unit that's needed. So they'll get as many 0 to 30s as they can for the project. And it's also, as we talked about earlier, these projects always have blended resources from different programs that have different kind of opportunities and needs. So it produces across that 0 to 50 spectrum.
Okay. So then the strategy for 50 to 80, we're basically looking at bonusing to get the private sector to produce that?
Well, I mean, today, if you were to ask me to point to that, it would be bonuses. There's an experiment in Old Town about SDC waivers, but it's not a resource that necessarily exists today. Although some programs do go up to 80% MFI, but Javier knows this better than I do. But the point that you're making with that policy is that, we have an affordable housing need. It's well documented, 0 to 50. Our programs are there, and the resources are today insufficient. And in a little bit, I think this policy you're framing is in reaction to the workforce housing rhetoric, which, in some calculations, workforce housing goes from 60 to 120, right? So you're zeroing in on something that is a low-income household that we think has particular benefits, especially if you look at proximity to work and transportation by being located in the central city. You're sort of adding a nuance to the goal, and you're putting a challenge on the table for all of us to find programs and resources to try to produce those units.
I think I think a big challenge in utilizing the density bonuses in the urban city and central city is to get those, you usually are into a more expensive building type. And Javier can probably comment on this also. A lot of affordable housing projects, they can't afford to go in a tall steel concrete building. They're typically in the kind of 5 to 6 story light gauge metal framing or wood framing over a podium. So sometimes, we don't want to over rely on a density bonus to push our numbers way up on affordable housing. It's the point I would make.
Right. So in just in terms of this discussion of the bonus, what we're really undertaking is sort of an economic analysis of it to try to be able to report back to you what we think is within we can actually produce, given the value of floor area in the central city in different buildings. And the way we design it will depend on the affordability levels that we set. And so today with this policy, you're setting a bar that is going to make us shoot for the 50 to 80, although our economic study is going to show you 80 to 100 and 100 and 120. We could work it with a transfer kind of position, provision as well. But once again, that's an economic because somebody's got to buy it to transfer it. So the study is going to show us if we can produce any units by this approach in our marketplace. We're confident that we can. I'm not sure what level of affordability we're going to be able to hit with that, but that's what the study's about. So then the other additional parts are Affordable Housing Policy 24, which is a new policy that came out of the discussions that you had, which is just to put home ownership on the table. And when you talk about low-income housing, that 0 to 1, that 80 to 120, if it's a home ownership unit, I believe this is what Javier is telling me, that's often where you see people actually be able to cross into a program where you're still a low-income household, but you're able to get into a home ownership unit. So that's why, that whole spectrum exists. But what we're saying here is we're also looking to try to improve homeownership rates. And that's consistent with, this policy is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And you can see that we set a target for 30% between 0 and 80 explicit, and that's, what we're going to try to monitor our progress against. So the rest of these are the action items that really instruct us to go figure out to make the changes in the code, to implement these policies, to start to come up with the strategies, financial and otherwise, to do them. And what we would do is if this approach to setting housing priorities in the central city is acceptable to everybody, we're going to go back and amend the plan to reflect that. And so what we do is we're taking out, in some of the specific district plans, we had references to different goals for different districts and workforce housing. We're cleaning all that out so that it's a simple, clear message and it applies across the central city. We're still keeping the Old Town Chinatown policy slightly different because of the large concentration of affordable housing already there, and it's consistent with the strategy for the period, for a period to try to balance that out with more market rate units. But at the end of the day, it's 30% is what we're shooting for the whole central city.
So if I can add in regard to the affordable housing component, we're looking at opportunities to do things differently, and that means mixed use, mixed income, from 0 to 120, and how would that work with this, whether it's with subsidy or with different programs. The tax exemption is another program that we use for affordable housing as well. So we, at the same time, like I said previously, we're not going to be able to build ourselves out of this need of affordable housing. So therefore, we're also looking at how do we leverage the current market that's there and be able to provide some affordable housing within that market.
Other questions?
Okay, yeah, Carrie.
Yeah, not so much a question, but a statement of appreciation of bringing these additional policies into the framework, and particularly support for, in addition to the folks who are at the very lowest end of the scale, support for folks who are a little bit higher up the scale, because what we're really ultimately looking at here is housing is a multi-generational problem, and you can support people at the desperately low end of things for a generation, but it doesn't necessarily translate into an improved outcome for their kids. Whereas when you start talking about things like supporting home ownership and the wealth transfer that happens with that from generation to generation, then you start building a more middle-class community. And so I think it's not one or the other, it's both. And I appreciate your balancing it.
Good. So that's our presentation on the housing policy. Okay, let's go look at Bridgehead Heights, number 2. Okay,
Doesn't like you.
and of course, this one's all about the maps. So I think they're in your package, though, are they? Everyone? I have a hard copy that I can.
They're seared on the back of my eyeballs, Joe.
Yeah. So maybe I'll just describe them. Because they were in your original package, if any of you still have this handout from the meeting before. But what we were going to show you was a summary of those discussion of the Bridgehead Height proposals. Remember, we were talking about the two that we're talking about it at all the bridgeheads, but the two that you wanted to talk about most, and the one in particular was Morrison Bridgehead. We showed you how today that height is 75 feet, and we're proposing increasing it in a stair-step fashion, but increasing it up to 250 on the waterfront with a 75-foot sort of podium, a datum, so it matches the street wall along NATO. We showed you the shadow analysis that comes from that expansion, and that it does at the designated time of day and day of the year that we do our shadow analysis under city code. There is some shadow cast onto a portion
That's the
of.
wind. That's the wind factor right there.
Oh, there you go. Great. So those two sites. Next slide. There's Morrison. Next. There's the sites, everyone. Remember this. And the challenge of that is the ramps. That's what it is today. You see 460, 235, 75. It steps down. The historic districts to the south or to the north. Our proposal is this bigger stair step, but the whole principle is to try to open up development opportunities for very challenged sites on the waterfront with those ramps. And even doing this is no guarantee that we're going to find a way to really build around or remove, recalibrate those ramps. And especially for the northbound, for the westbound ramp, there's traffic reasons and freight reasons why that's why that's not going to be acceptable. But we wanted, because they're so difficult and because it's a great location for the waterfront, we wanted to open up this possibility for it and still maintain the step down. So you see it goes 250, 325, 460, and in the stakeholder advisory committee discussions, there's an architectural element that we would extend 75 across to create a datum there. It does shadow the park. Next slide. And this just shows those two red squares that were shadowed in the previous slide. That just shows you, give you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about. Okay, next. Then the other one is the Hawthorne Bridgehead. And Hawthorne Bridgehead is in a little bit different situation because today the heights are already taller there. They're up to 200. And there's very few sites that are left, and those sites tend to be constrained by lot configuration and ramps. We're proposing 325 at this particular bridgehead. And that's the coin tower poking out because it predates our height regulations. And this shows you sort of a characterization of the kind of scale of building that could be built. Two of those parcels are owned by Multnomah County and are under discussions as courthouse sites and of the shading that's involved there. So that's the discussion of Bridgehead Heights. Any questions on that?
Yeah, so, I read in the paper this morning that the mayor is engaged in talks about removing one of the ramps on the Morrison Bridge. Is there any way that we can condition these height limits such that if the ramps are, if a ramp is removed, that the height on that parcel goes back down, since we're removing the obstacle that presumably needs the height to make it happen?
Well, I don't know that I could tell you what the part of the development potential of the site is what justifies the cost of removing the ramp. So if you take that, and it is tied to FAR, and it's also tied to just the practicality. That's a really tough site because you've got a light rail on one side of it, and NATO on the other, and just access with or without a ramp is difficult. So I'm not really sure what scale of building practically could get programmed in there. So our approach to height across the central city since the 80s has been to really look at the FAR and allow a good deal of flexibility in the height so that there's different building configurations that could succeed. So I don't know that there's a mathematical formula, Chris, that
Right.
that says
Well,
it.
if I look at at least the current state of the public market proposal, and I realize that's not finalized, that they appear to have, the low market areas in the parcels where the ramps are, and then they have the taller building in that parcel one block back. So,
They actually have contacted us over the last week to say, as the plans are developing, they're interested in more flexibility on height, but I don't know the details other than that. So, yeah, I don't think that we can bank on those previous schematics.
this is the hard one for me. It's a coin toss for me, kind of where to go with this.
On the Morrison?
Yeah.
Now, is the proposal to take both ramps out? Because I know the one on the north that connects is a pretty critical freight route for the Central East Side.
I think there's no real proposal. It's just sort of an analysis that PBOT may be undertaking. And all of our discussions have always made the case that the movement on Morrison Bridge on the north ramp for access to Central East Side is critical. So I would expect
And we
that
put
that
in
one
language, it's in the
cannot
amendment
go
list here
away.
to reflect that.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
I think
So-
it's in the plan already, right?
So the redevelopment potential is on the south side.
On the south side, if it's
Good.
even possible there, and once again, the analysis shows it. And with all these ramp sites, see, this is the legacy of the freeway and getting in and out of the central city. They
Yeah.
happen to be right on our waterfront, the place where we want stuff, and they're expensive projects to implement, and they all come with trade-offs. So part of what we're trying to do here is just say, okay, is there a principle here that works in terms of urban design, principle here that works in terms of activating the park, principle here that works in terms of at least opening the chance for provoking something, helping something happen here, because the location's so important to us, and it's been stuck for a long time.
Yeah, my concern is, I guess, a design and maybe a code issue, but wind is a major concern, the impact at the pedestrian scale. And I did my due diligence. I've talked with Catherine Schultz a couple times, and she assures me there are ways to mitigate those effects. And so at what point, is this during the development of codes? At what point do we have an opportunity to influence how those structures are built to mitigate?
Yeah, Commissioner, we would welcome, and we would just sort of take on, but you could do it by resolution, that we would add exploring provisions to
For
mitigate,
developing.
for new development, to mitigate pedestrian level wind impacts, because it's a common practice in other cities. And it's funny, in doing this height research, I've been reading, old central city plans, and we've been talking about it forever. So it's a sound practice, and we're willing to explore it.
I'd like to make sure we do that.
So these are the two items that you wanted to actually, for us to bring back to discuss. I don't know, we could wait to the end to see where we are on all these, but so that's staff's proposal on this. And then the last one is just to review the additional materials on the West End Heights, since we spent so much time in the hearings and in the advisory committee process discussing this. So you remember the principle of how we've done this in the central city for a long time is, or since the 80s, and that's the middle map. So that's really the most relevant, is FAR set with height to allow actually always more headroom than the FAR might allow, so that you can go tall and skinny. You've got flexibility to move around. And that in the 80s, the whole downtown used to be 460. In the 80s, that's the first time you see where we really started to align these heights and FARs with the densities and sort of level of development that we were hoping to get out of those districts, and with the major focus being the downtown core, and later, as we introduced it, the transit mall. And then since the 1988 plan, there were revisions to it, but basically it kept the same kind of approach over. South of Salmon, 250 feet. North of Salmon, it can go up to 300 feet for certain types of structures. And those fine little blocks that are in there that you're seeing, those are view quarters. So, and our plan is also continuing the analysis, and we'll have those view quarters reflected as well. So that's how we got there. In terms of the built form of the West End, we showing you here the existing building stock, highlighting the buildings that are currently over 100 feet. Also showing you the black dots are on historic landmarks. Most of those are national historic landmarks, individually listed historic landmark properties. So they have a certain level of control built into them already because of those standards. Some of those may be state, but I believe most of them are national. So they're protected already, irregardless of the height limits. Next. And this is back one, Carl. And so, you can sort of see, we didn't highlight it in this one, but you can sort of see the development potential sites. Remember that analysis we typically do, and there's a lot of surface lots, there's a lot of smaller buildings that are underdeveloped for the amount of FAR that are on the sites. And if we take the amount of growth that's forecast for the West End as part of the overall Central City Plan, it's that scale of additional development over the next 25 years. It's not saying those buildings and those aren't buildings, they're just building masses, you know what I mean? But we're trying to show you an order of magnitude scale of change. So what the plan has been for the West End is that it is a higher density residential, and to the north, residential commercial neighborhood. Well served by transit, even more so now that we have streetcar, and a neighborhood that does have a variety of scales of structures in it, and that's part of its character, and we're supportive of that. The historic designations are part of what helped keep it that way. The pace of development doesn't look overwhelming to the district based on what we can see. And remember, all this height discussion and FAR discussion always takes place in the context of design review. And design review focuses on the ground plane. And as we heard in a lot of the testimony, what happens on that first 40 feet is really important. The design of the public realm and the design of the streets is really important. The combination, as we move into the analysis of bonuses, of looking at allowing or tailoring our bonus system so that we might be able to find the opportunities here of through transfers or other positions to even open up more opportunities to add value to smaller, more historic structures. So that's what it takes to build taller. All of that's in the mix here. But our basic proposal in the plan was not to change course from the 1988 plan and to keep the 250. That's the bottom line.
Joe, what's the height of the building at the, I guess, the south end of the park blocks there, down by the Fox Theater? The one that's under construction?
Oh, Park Avenue West?
Yeah.
It's over 400 feet tall.
Over 400?
Yeah.
And the height limit then for that section around the park blocks is going to be 250?
No, so
Do you have that on there, Carl?
so park blocks are here, and let's see, Fox. So this is Park Avenue West. I think we're right here. So this is all 460 and would stay 460. That's the sort of the downtown, central downtown office core area.
So
The highest FARs and the highest height limits.
So where it is park blocks, the heights are lower, and you actually have a solar provision that you have to step back, right,
Yeah,
from the
so
park?
one thing that we have in a lot of places, and we intend to look at actually applying in other places where there's new open space or it needs to be readjusted, is the open space performance standard in the code, which essentially looks at the half blocks to the east or to the west and the south of an open space like Pioneer Square, and says that within that first half block adjacent to those open spaces, the height limit's quite low, usually 100 or 150 feet. It's possible to exceed that by going through a shadow analysis as part of your design review. So if you can demonstrate that by orienting the tower in such a way and the shape of the floor plate in such a way that you can minimize the amount of the shading on that open space at certain times of the year at 3 o'clock on April something or other, I don't remember what the code says, then it's okay to go higher. But you're essentially the burden is on the applicant then to prove that the shade created on that open space isn't more than the building would be at that lower limit. So that works pretty well adjacent to those open spaces.
So in addition to the absolute height limits, then there's the solar and the public view
Right.
that drive that picture that you presented, where things are substantially below 250.
Yeah,
along
that's
the-
right. So the shading against adjacent to the park blocks, absolutely. Anywhere there's a view corridor that cuts across the central city, like from the Rose Garden, for example, those would also limit heights.
There's paths cut, when you see the detailed map, when you see the view corridors cut across the city. And the block you're talking about, Gary, where it's the discontinuous part of the park blocks, it's just an anomaly. That is, we've been through trying to change that over the years to look at, there was a move for a while to make it more of the park blocks, but it's the only place like that that's in that line.
I would just add one more thing that's interesting about that particular building, which is larger and has a higher FAR than would typically be allowed on a single block. The way that worked is that all of the development potential from the new Director's Park, which is now a park, public open space, was transferred to one block over to allow that to happen, because both blocks were privately owned. So essentially you got what would have been two office buildings at half the size, at one that's twice the size, and in exchange we were able to get that public plaza. So that was done through a master plan.
Thank you.
It's interesting that Gary identified that location because Commissioner Smith and I took a walk around looking at building heights, and that's where we went first. And Director's Park is really a great laboratory to understand building heights in downtown Portland. On the east side of it, you have the Moyer Tower, large, tall building. South of it is a hotel, which probably had shade influence on Director Park. And then, of course, the new tower going up on the north side of that space. And then along the western edge are a series of low-profile buildings, kind of historic in character. So it really has kind of all conditions right there, and it's a good place to understand building heights.
Well, and I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that some of those western edge buildings are landmarks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, they
so,
appear to
so a
be.
little bit, that's what's helping us. And if they're
Keeps the
national
sun in
landmarks,
there.
they're okay. If they're city landmarks, they're vulnerable, but it's parts of what helps lock in that system, that's profile.
And to confirm, the 250 feet was the original proposal in this west quadrant plan. It hasn't been reduced.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we did not propose changes in this particular part of the central city. We only proposed changes at the bridgeheads and a couple other locations.
Transit Mall.
Transit Mall.
So I appreciate seeing the historic buildings with the little dots. So just to clarify, if it's a historic building that probably wouldn't go up, but it still has the ability to trade its height?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of confusion about this. These are the buildings that are either currently National Register property buildings, individually listed, or local landmark buildings. And so they have some protections under our current rules and regulations about demolition, and you got to go to City Council if you want to take one out. And it's happened, but it's only happened once. So that's a pretty good tool to try and ensure the preservation of those buildings. They also have access to some preservation programs and incentives, one of which is the floor area transfer program. So they can send unused floor area, because they're a small building in a place where there's a lot allowed, to some other development site. And then that should, in theory, bring revenue to the restoration and sort of permanent nature character of that building and restoring that building. The issue in the West End, as we've heard from a lot of folks in the district, and we agree with them, is there are many buildings that are interesting older buildings that add a lot of character to the district that don't currently have that status. So there should, in a perfect world, there should be more dots on this map. Our current system, legal system in Oregon, doesn't let us just designate landmarks of privately owned buildings. It has to be an owner consent kind of a situation. So one of the things that's reflected in the plan is that we would like to update our inventory, so our historic resources inventory, to find out more exactly what is on the ground there and has merit and could be potentially listed, and try to figure out some more incentives for increasing the number of buildings that might actually potentially be sending sites for that transfer program, and maybe even make that transfer program work a little bit better. There's probably some things we can do to make it more attractive and actually get more of those older character buildings that maybe aren't officially recognized today protected for the long run.
Carl, in general, very many private owners in the West End come forward to have their properties designated historic.
I might pull Nicholas
Is there a
up.
pattern of that?
Nicholas, are you here and do you know?
I don't know. Nicholas might know.
Good. We'll ask him. Sure. In the West End, are there very many property owners that are kind of voluntarily stepping forward to have their buildings designated historic? Are the tax benefits compelling enough? Is that occurring?
There are a fair number of historic buildings or buildings in the excuse me, in the West End that have been designated as landmarks in the past few years. There's been a sort of a steady, we don't get that many a year. There's probably 10 or 12 in the whole city, but in the past 5 or 6 years, there's probably been at least 5 or 6 buildings in the West End.
Great, thanks.
So that concludes the items that we have prepared a presentation for. You've also received a memo today on environmental issues that updates some of the items that would have been in this attachment D, and they're based on follow-up discussions with Commissioner Houck primarily. And I think we're good to go. Yeah, come on up, Mindy, if you want to explain those. Thank you.
Hi, Mindy Brooks, Planning and Sustainability. In your packet, you have a memo that is from us to the Commission, and this is in response to some of Commissioner Houck's additional questions regarding habitat creation. And then you have this sheet without handwriting on it that's in there that has some red text on it, which are revisions to the table that you had previously, and then the second half, the additional revisions are related to the memo. So this amendment sheet is kind of new to you, so if you want to take a second and read it, and then we can discuss a little bit more.
Any questions? Mike?
Well, yeah, I think we can cut to the chase here pretty quickly. First of all, I did send many comments to staff. And I am exceedingly pleased at how responsive they've been. And we've gone back and forth, and I think they've really done a good job of addressing those issues, including things like implement as opposed to consider or whatever. But there are a lot of other things that I think really strengthen the West Quadrant Plan with regard to conservation environmental issues. The revisions to the table on this sheet that we all just got, number 23, as you remember, I've complained endlessly about Ross Island and Holgate Channel and the impacts that are potential with regard to increasing activity on the river. I had a conversation with Chair Baugh today, who expressed concern about having specifics in my suggestion that we develop a strategy to address, and I said, impacts of boating and increased human activity on habitat and fish and wildlife on the Ross Island Complex and Holgate Channel as part of the river plan and South Reach. Chair Baugh suggested that we remove boating and increased activity. I didn't realize he was a a wakeboarder or,
I'm not a
or ran jet skis, but I'm okay with taking that out. The important thing is that we do have some acknowledgement that there already are significant impacts. All you have to do, if you go out on the Holgate Channel and look at the east bank of the Willamette River, it's a disaster area, as is Ross Island with regard to camping and all kinds of negative impacts. On numbers 46, 47, E9, I was pleased to see the reference of locating redevelopment west of Natal Parkway outside of the floodplain, but my question might be that there are probably some minor developments that might be anticipated. We can argue over what those might be later, but I would suggest putting significant in between new and redevelopment to indicate that we're concerned about significant levels of development. And then the last one I've got, actually not the last one, second to last one, is adding fish on number 65. We should be talking about fish and wildlife habitat, not just wildlife.
I think that was just a typo. I missed.
Yeah, right. And the last issue is the number of potential, well, the difference between restoration and enhancement. And we're interested in going, and all of the research, and there are a number of folks here from BPS and Bureau of Environmental Services, all of the research over the last decade or 2 decades has shown that as opposed to at one point where people just described salmonids as coming down from the Willamette Falls and basically holding their gills and rushing through the Portland Harbor to the Columbia. We know that they're in the Portland Harbor at all times of the year and all life stages of salmonids. And we also know that they need, on average, about a quarter-mile habitat in order to be able to actually make it down and back up the river, particularly young ones going down. So the question is, the issue is how many restoration sites, and by restoration we mean habitat creation, really. I mean, it's taking something that's already existing but degraded and improving it dramatically, or areas where there was habitat at one point and there's some potential because of their shallow water there to actually create new habitat, as opposed to simply doing enhancement. And the big question is how many of those sites are there? And there are 6, as staff pointed out, there are 6 potential sites, and the suggestion is, my recollection is 2 to 3 minimum.
Right, so originally, we had underneath the Willamette River to focus on 2 to 3 shallow water habitat restoration areas. That's in addition to enhancement, pretty much wherever you can get it. We're recommending that we add at least, so this is the first underline, at least 2 to 3 specific shallow water habitat restoration areas, just to recognize that there might be opportunities for others.
And are those at sites where there are not conflicts with other uses?
So in order for it to be restoration, we would have to that would have to be the priority. We would have to significantly limit other uses, try to keep people out of the area restored.
Right.
So these 6 places that are opportunity areas, there's other desired goals and uses there, which is one of the constraints as to how many we'll be able to get. So that's our suggestion, is to look at least 2 to 3.
So then, by adopting at least 2 to 3 specific shallow water habitat areas does not preclude enhancement/restoration in those other sites.
Sure, enhancement.
It just so happens that there will be some conflicts there will need to be addressed in that process.
Right, and the conflicts might be addressed through formal mitigation if a site is redeveloped with docks being replaced, or it may be enhancement that goes above and beyond that.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So
I'm good to go.
Okay, so that memo and materials Mindy just presented and the housing policies are the only new things that were in front of you tonight. The rest of the proposed changes in attachment D were what we were going to put on the table now. If there's any of these that in your review you wanted to talk about, sounds like we already did item 23 in Mindy's piece. So what we would be looking for today is a motion to approve the West Quadrant Plan as amended. But before we get to that point, if there were any items in attachment D people wanted to talk about, we wanted to make the opportunity for that.
So, Joe, in interest of time, could we just kind of, what I'd like to do is walk through, we've listed out housing, height, West End, attachment D, and the environmental revisions. And so can we just go by and see if we have any, height probably being the one that has probably the most discussion coming up?
Sure,
So if we
please.
can just kind of click through, if I can just kind of walk through the others and see if we don't have any disagreement, we can kind of get to the height discussion, and then we'll be ready to, I think, hopefully vote. I think
great.
that may get us quicker. So the housing discussion you heard before, is there any disagreement or changes you would want to make?
Just a comment, really not a change, that in order to meet those goals, we may need to look at new ways to do housing. Relating to what Don said, there's certain economics about a building, but maybe there's micro-housing or other kinds of things. Doesn't need to be in the plan, just a comment.
Part of the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chris?
Nope.
Nope. Any?
No, good to go on those.
Good. West End. You heard the discussion about the heights. We're going to maintain what's there.
I'm okay with it as stated by staff.
Any?
My only concern, again, is the mitigating for wind and concerns over shadows.
Okay. And are they addressed?
Well, I think we can follow up.
Follow up,
That could
okay.
be a-
Okay. The environmental revisions that Mike just
Well, I'm
discussed.
comfortable with what we have, but Don wants to challenge me on that.
Well, actually not challenge, but rather really support. I thought your review comments were really quite good and improved the document. I have one clarifying question, Mike, and this is regarding the locate all new redevelopment west of NATO Parkway outside of the floodplain. Describe that geography to me. West, okay, is that River Place? Is it, how far south does that extend, and how far north does that extend? And are there buildings in the floodplain now?
Uncharacteristically for me, I will defer to someone else.
That,
Good comments, Mike.
yeah. Those, that particular action is under the downtown district.
Yeah.
So it applies to the park, basically from the southern end of the bowl, north, but not all the way north. So downtown district doesn't extend up into, I'm trying to think of what district it bumps into. Anyway,
Not
but it's
where the
most of,
terminals are.
yeah, it's most of Waterfront Park. And right now, Waterfront Park is not in the floodplain, but FEMA will be remapping the floodplain to consider climate change. And so this is a look to that to say we want to keep new significant development to the west side of NATO and not invest money where there may be floodplain changes
That
in the
makes
park.
sense, to where
Yeah.
you'd be displacing flood volume.
Right.
Okay,
So River
that's
Place
fine.
is not in that. River Place actually south of
Great,
that.
great.
Okay.
That does it for me.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Yes.
I just have a question on the designation of the restoration sites. That happens how?
Are you looking at the list of opportunity sites?
Right.
Yeah, so we've worked closely with Bureau of Environmental Services to look at areas where there's existing shallow water habitat because you can't really create shallow water habitat. The river sort of decides where that goes. So these are areas where there is shallow water habitat and there's some opportunity for increasing either the space that's available or significantly increasing function in those spaces. So it was a work with Bureau of Environmental Services to look at that.
Okay, so you'll just sort of look at the sites and figure out which 2 or 3 are the best opportunity and hit those first.
Well, and it might be dependent on which ones are coming up for redevelopment, and there's an opportunity and to look at those, and it may have something to do with cleanup actions as well, too.
I like the bit about after the next big earthquake or flood, there may be other opportunities opening up to us.
There might be. And just
There's something to look forward to.
the habitat restoration sites are driven by their physical condition and the opportunity they present. One of our bedevilments is that they're also, some of them are in places where people want to get in the river as well.
Yeah.
And so part of what the philosophy we're trying to carry forward is in the spirit of this plan and River Plan, it's a package. We have to make progress on the restoration sites. That's a longstanding commitment. We're interested in opening up these access sites too, And so we need to get specific about which ones work best. And it's a variety of reasons that may lead us to a list at the end.
We were, Mike, coincidentally, our Southeast Quadrant Committee was talking about this last week. About open space, where there should be people, where there should not be people, and kind of the do's and don'ts and how we select these sites came up, and really interesting comments on them. And I'm glad it came up in that forum because you have a lot of property owners on that group. So it was good.
The next is the list, does
Attachment D?
Attachment D, do people have any revisions or questions on? And so what I'd like to do is if we can just go through what yours are, and if anybody else does, we'll just go through them and
Okay.
list them out.
I only have a comment. I don't have a proposed change, but I do want to get something in the legislative record. So in items 3 and 17, language was added about access for emergency medical and fire response. And of course, I'm supportive of making sure we have good access for emergency services. It did, however, trigger a bit of PTSD for me when we were doing the enhanced bike lanes on Stark and Oak downtown. The original design was for curbside bike lane, then the parked cars to buffer us from the traffic, and then the traffic lane. And that basically got nixed by Portland Fire and Rescue, who said, well, if you do that, we won't have room for the outriggers on our ladder trucks.
To get the right angle to the building?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So we wind up in a situation where, fighting a fire once every 5 years prevents us from having the preferred bike lane configuration every day of the year. Staff was kind enough to facilitate a conversation this morning with one of the fire marshals for me. And we had a good back and forth. I wouldn't say we reached agreement, but they acknowledged they could probably be more aggressive about pursuing alternatives. They said in that case, maybe if they took out a couple of the auto parking spaces, that would provide the place for the outriggers. We wouldn't have to do the lane reconfiguration. It's very much a project by project thing. But I just want to make sure as we introduce this into the language that I'm preserving a legislative record that there is intent to try not to compromise every day of the year facilities for occasional emergency situations and find a good balance. So, okay.
Teresa, do you have any additions, subtractions? Mike?
Done.
Maggie?
Yeah, I have a few questions. Looking over item 58 on the attachment D that you gave us via email, it says, it talks about high performance areas. I'm wondering if those are in each of the other quadrant plans proposed for other quadrant plans, as well as, I think this is only in the Pearl district that was included. I didn't see it scattered throughout.
And that's interesting. That's a good catch. If you look at the Central City-wide policies
Okay.
under environment, we added, at the same time that we added this, we added a whole section, Central City-wide, on high-performance buildings and,
Okay.
and energy conservation. So it is intended to apply everywhere. I'm not quite sure if I don't think the intent was just the Pearl, although.
Okay.
So will we make the revision to include it in the entire Central City?
Well, what I think is it's already there, and this is what we'd have to go back and check. It may not be necessary to say in the Pearl because we've added all these policies in the Central City-wide policy that are much more specific about energy performance and high-performance buildings. We know that we've done research into district energy in the Pearl, and so this is probably part of the legacy of that. So we know that there's this kernel of the ability to do that in the Pearl, and actually the right kind of densities. We're still challenged by the economics of it no matter where we do it, and we'll probably see it near PSU before we see it anywhere else.
Okay.
And I would just add to that, so that there's a little bit in the chapter, the early chapter 3, where it talks about the sort of conceptual development of this plan. There's a map, it's called Green Systems, it's on page 32. That actually maps out some of these potential high-performance areas.
Okay.
It's kind of an evolution of the eco-district concept, but at a slightly more focused scale, and a couple of them show up in the Pearl. So I think that in the districts where there were on this map some specific areas, we tended towards putting some specific language in those sub-district sections. But
And then as the plan evolved, we moved the whole kit and caboodle up into the central citywide.
Okay, great. I have a few other items that I'd like to. So I would just like item 60. I know we've heard a lot of testimony on reducing height, but I would just like to reiterate that actually that height and density. I would be in favor of height and density wherever possible. So not reducing building heights if it still fits in with design character. And item 69, South Waterfront. You write, explore incentives to incorporate some housing into the northern portion of the district. I don't know, some, it's just very vague. I don't quite know what, this is South Waterfront, 69.
Yeah, so the north part of the South Waterfront District is OHSU land,
Okay.
basically. So that is going to become the medical hospital campus over time, which is great. There were some ideas about, that maybe its primary function, but if there were opportunities to incorporate some housing into that as well, it could actually lead to a stronger, more vibrant, interesting neighborhood. And at various times, OHSU has been more or less interested in that idea. I don't think it's completely off the table.
Okay.
So that's kind of where that
Is there a
comes
way to
from.
be more specific on that without,
Yeah, I think we're
limiting?
trying to avoid a place where we're saying something that's in contradiction to the known future of that
Okay.
district. That's one that's very important to the city as well, which is encouraging their campus development. So that was the line we were trying to walk there, but we can.
Right, we're trying to put on the table that for policy purposes, we're open to housing, and the property owner is still figuring it out, that whole district for their purposes. So we don't really we're not at a point where there's a property or a particular deal you can point to. It's part of this whole mix of North Macadam that we were just talking about too.
We could maybe be more clear about it and say, housing in addition to the critically important campus, blah, 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 something, if that makes you feel better.
So just to follow up on that, I had a question there too about the alignment of that policy with the housing policy. When you look at the just to make sure it aligned with the housing policy that we just talked about previously.
Yes, and the changes to clean out the district plans to align with the housing policies are not reflected in here. But I know Catherine's looked at it already. We just didn't want to add to the confusion by giving you a revised version of this.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, so our intent would be to, on the two-pager housing story that Joe started with, this one, we would make sure that all of this conforms to this approach.
That's where we're landing if you all support it.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
sorry, and to confirm, anywhere we see workforce housing throughout this plan, it's out, correct? Okay, good.
It is.
And then in my notes, for some reason, I had for UD2 in the Pearl District, so I'm looking at just the comprehensive plan right now, that the heights were reduced from 250 to 100 feet. Did I make that up?
And tell me where you are.
I'm looking at page 156. UD2.
156.
It looks like it was reduced just for.
Oh, within the Northwest 13th Avenue Historic District, which is a small historic district that flanks both sides of Northwest 13th Avenue. And today, so the height limits are, for the most part, 100. Part of it is 75 today, a little tiny piece of it. But that historic district is actually a fairly recent one, and through whatever sort of the timing of different policies being enacted, the height bonuses are available within that historic district, as they are available throughout the area around it. But the desire was to, and actually this is sort of part of a trade-off because we're going up in terms of flexibility in other parts of the Pearl. But within that historic district, we'd like to get rid of the height bonus option. So essentially pushing it down a little bit in that narrow area.
Just to keep that for the historical preservation.
Exactly, right.
Okay.
And actually, there are, unlike some of our historic districts, there are very few redevelopment parcels within that historic district. I think there's only one surface parking lot. So it's essentially kind of locked in. So we need to remove that sort of false incentive to alteration from the code.
Okay. But is there any way, like, as we were looking at, Old Town, Chinatown in terms of height or selling air rights, keeping those intact so that additional areas, say, further north can take that additional height? Or is that?
Within, from this historic district?
Yeah,
Well, so
I
we-
guess it would be
yeah.
within a district.
You know,
You
so
would
I
be
mean,
transferring
the way our
those
current
rights.
tools work is that it's all about the floor area ratio. So if there's unused floor area on any
Yeah.
of those historic buildings, they can send it
Okay.
somewhere.
Just-
Well, actually, they can't. Sorry, we're in the weeds now. They can't today in a historic district. They can as an individual property outside of a historic district. We'd like to add contributing buildings within historic districts to the eligible list of properties that can send. That's one of the things we know we want to do through this code update.
And
So that should help a little bit.
Our bonus study will help shine some light on this, but I think the value is in the floor area ratio typically more than height.
Yeah.
We don't really see the sale of height much, but it's something we're going to explore. I'm not really sure how to value additional height, so.
Right.
Any others?
I think that's all.
Don?
Yeah.
Gary? I have some very quick ones. Number 50. And maybe this goes to part of the housing, but I'd like to ensure that we're talking about culturally diverse families in the language.
Okay.
So the second sentence, that it's culturally diverse families.
We can do that, I think.
Okay. Number 55, I think that's cleaned up when it talks about affordable housing. That would be a cleanup with our new housing policy, so it would better reflect.
Correct.
Okay. Number 60, the design guidelines being culturally sensitive. So I'm looking to say that in Old Town, that we heard testimony about the Chinese and Japanese culture being preserved, and try to reflect that in terms of new guidelines that they reflect. The new buildings have some cultural sensitivity to the current cultures down there. Number 69, and you already talked about that one, so it's alignment just with the housing policy, correct?
Correct.
And number 74 is we have 0 to 30, 30 to 60, 61 to 81, and 81 to 120. That would be cleaned up to reflect the current housing policy, correct?
Correct. Actually, that whole statement goes
That whole
away
statement goes away.
because it's
Okay.
superseded by the new policy.
Okay. And then in the appendix on page 157, RC2, the third and fourth bullet, is about assisting and accelerating the redevelopment of surface parking lots. It seems to me that we ought to strike those bullets or restrict the use of parking out of district buildings within the district, that we just ought to strike those two. It seems to me encouraging parking, it encourages the use of the parking lots, and I don't want to remove the parking lots, but I don't want to encourage their use.
So are you talking about the fourth bullet, Commissioner?
The third and fourth.
What, I'm sorry,
So-
what page?
150.
157.
So I don't think, there may be some confusion about, this wasn't intended to be referring to surface parking, but rather to structured parking or parking within buildings and developments. Would it help to clarify that? Does that make the issue?
I think the principle was that we want to see the surface lots, especially in the historic districts, which are limited in terms of the FAR, that they have redeveloped. And they tend to be small lots, and so they're not going to typically economically provide parking. So look to where you're building parking in a bigger amount around the perimeter of one of those districts, allow it to be used to cover the parking for the buildings in the district. That's the principle.
But it's structured, if it's structured parking, I'm really fine. If it
Okay.
allows
Right.
for the transfer of that parking to a surface parking lot.
No.
or
It just compounds the problem. I think.
We can specify that we're talking about structured
Structured parking.
parking. I think that's fine. Is that, let me check with Mauricio. If he's here. That's fine.
No, I don't want new, but it's
But
the,
they're already banned, so
it's not the new, it's that
existing.
underutilized would be a surface parking lot.
We'll just put structured in.
Yeah, we'll make it
Like
apply just to
structured
new
parking then
construction.
eliminates the, so if we are good with all of those, the last thing is height,
Bridgehead heights.
bridgehead heights, if no one else has any other issues with the heights. So bridgehead heights. So let's take on Hawthorne first. Are there concerns or questions about Hawthorne height?
My concern is the same as Chris's. I have really mixed feelings about it, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I continue to have, I mean, I appreciate the clarifications that staff has provided, but I continue just to have a concern about what it's going to feel like as these buildings rise in height close to the river. And I think, you know, in reading through things and the shadow study, I think the shadow is a good surrogate. It's a surrogate measure for what's going on, but I think, you know, for example, comparing the shadow with the shadow cast by trees, two terribly different things. And so I think it's going to feel differently. I don't know what the solution is, and it seems like we're setting up kind of a paradox where on the one hand we're saying, let's embrace the river, and on the other hand we're visually closing it off with these height limits. And so I guess maybe my question is more around what are the countervailing things we can do to improve access to the river and to really have people embrace the river downtown?
Well, there's a long list of ideas that have been discussed in that regard. I don't know which ones actually to point to that are in the plan. Carl, do you have something?
No, I mean, I think it's the crux of the idea, which is that a longstanding and unmet goal is really activating that waterfront, right? And so this idea about additional flexibility at these bridgeheads and height is one idea for trying to finally get more stuff happening, more people near the river. That goal goes all the way back to the 70s of we should have active, vibrant development facing the waterfront park, facing the river, and it's largely unmet today. And at the bridgeheads, it's particularly difficult, partly because they're challenging sites because of access constraints and infrastructure and various other things, and ownership.
Can you speak up?
But yeah, sorry. But it's all part of that sort of that train of we've been trying to do this and we haven't really made that goal. Most of the sort of vibrant, exciting parts of the central city are a good 3 or 4 blocks west of NATO. And that's where our energy seems to be. And it's actually moving even further west with the vibrancy that's going on in the West End and, you know, in the Pearl District and other places. It's even pulling perhaps farther back from that waterfront. And so there's very little going on there most of the time and very little to draw people down. So it's really about just trying to get more attractions, more people, more offices, more housing adjacent to that waterfront. And the idea of using height as one way to help, not solve all the problems, but help with some of those development gaps and pro forma gaps, as people have looked at how do we get these things to work. It goes all the way back to about 2000 when the Portland Development Commission did the Waterfront Development Opportunities Study, which said, you know, they kind of mapped out all the blocks between about the Steel Bridge and the Hawthorne Bridge and said, you know, most of these blocks don't have anything great on them. They're either a blank wall or a surface parking lot or a vacant lot or, you know, whatever, just not what we want. And that one thing that could be helpful to get a little bit more excitement going there and more people and more energy would be looking at that height flexibility. You know, I think referring to the email that Kat Schultz sent out to you guys is maybe helpful because I think she kind of hit it on the head when she said, you know, this is we can explain all the arguments and they're all logical and they make sense, but at the end of the day, on this one, in this prominent place, it's kind of a feeling. You know, it's a little bit of a visceral sort of a feeling, and how do you feel about that? And you know, council's going to have the same conversation about how they feel about it. But you know, it's just something that I think at the end of the day you need to sort of maybe understand the arguments and then ask yourself, you know, Am I really that concerned about this idea that I just can't support it? And then that's okay.
Sally?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I hope I can get through this without coughing. The other thing that we heard in a number of symposiums and charrettes is that people wanted to see some variation along the waterfront. They wanted to have different experiences in different places, and I think this is one of the things that could lead to a more exciting node, and then you get into a more open area, and then another exciting node. So.
Yeah, I have to concur. That area right now is not inviting. So having something there that could invite some human traffic and some interest, if that's the way we have to get it with height, at least it's a try.
Yeah, I like the idea of building there and kind of creating a portal where you come into the city. I think spatially that'd be really interesting. And also, I think, it's a great place to embrace the river, and I would hope that the new buildings could do that. That they would express that notion of embracing the river. My only sadness is that the veritable quandary patio might go away as part of this, but you got to go on, got to move ahead with it. And so I think the idea is really exciting to me, because I think it is kind of a big gap right now, and I cross over it every day, and I could see something really interesting happening there.
Yeah, I'm really supportive of the increased height and density, especially if you can incentivize that along that area. I think it's a really good opportunity for housing and mixed-use development. So,
My question is, the height I am for, but I want to get something for it, and I want to get some housing. So I don't know.
Great place for that.
It's a great place for housing, and it seems that waterfront height is very valuable, at least in every other city that I've been in. Because it seems like buildings on the water are pretty valuable. Just looking at housing prices, if you look at the housing prices with a waterfront view. So is it possible to condition, and I ask this as a broader statement, is it possible to condition the height on getting something out of it for both the bridgeheads?
It is possible, and it's what we're going to design a bonus system, and that's going to be mostly around floor area ratio, but we're also going to look at what height, how one might handle height in a bonus system. It could be that there's a particular premium, right, for FAR in a location like that, and through an overlay, you could say within this waterfront zone, the bonus system is, the regular bonus system is X, but in the waterfront zone it's Y, and it would be tied to the economics of capturing that value that we sort of perceive is there. We're just going to try to document it and see if we can get something to work. That would be possible, Commissioner.
So is that, is that today that we would do that? I mean, in terms of intent, or is that down the road?
No, I would intend that we take a look at that as part of our bonus system study that's underway now.
okay.
So it wouldn't be today, I guess.
Right.
I'm not saying the bonus system, but the intent.
Oh, you could, it's in the same spirit as, we've gotten two today. We've heard from Commissioner Houck about exploring pedestrian level wind impact and ways to regulate that. This could be that same kind of directive to us in the action plan to go explore additional bonus premium in waterfront locations.
I think that's going in the right direction for me when I use the word portal. This is one of the most important bicycle portals into downtown. I mean, there's the great counter there every day, and I always monitor how many bikes have come in and out. If there's a new building there, I would hope part of it evaluating the pedestrian level for that building and that development accommodates bikes and a great portal design.
Other discussion on Hawthorne? I would like to propose at least that we explore the bonuses for housing on at least Hawthorne. And potentially both, but we haven't talked about the other.
So just to make sure I understand what that means, you're saying that in order to achieve the height that we've got mapped right now in the proposal, you would have to have some kind of housing component?
Well,
Or you
we
say,
have a,
or you
that they
say you go even
explore-
higher if
Yeah.
you get housing?
They explore that feasibility, and I guess that's right?
Right, yeah, we're going to explore it, and in both of these locations, it may not be a residential use. So the whole way we work this will depend
Well,
on that
it's
as well.
not
But
even
if
whether
it
you
is
get-
a residential use, then you would really see the premium, and there'd be something there to go after.
To me, it's not even whether you get the residential use, it's just whether you get the
Anything.
height.
Okay.
Because then you can transfer that value somehow, whether it's land or money or something, to achieve housing somewhere else in the central city.
So the charge to us is to explore how to value that additional height for a commercial and/or residential use, and then see how it works in a bonus situation.
Are we going to go on for a while yet?
No, we're almost done.
My question was, do we need to do a motion about this?
So we need to talk about Morrison real quick. Discussion on Morrison height?
Well, it seems to me that, the public market is the perfect use for the Morrison Bridgehead site. And I'm a little surprised and disappointed at the beginning of this process, they were like, oh yeah, we can do it within the current zoning. And the more we talked about the possibility of more height, the more they wanted to use it, right? So it almost seems like by talking about it, we caused the requirement for it. But,
Well, I thought Ron Paul said actually he absolutely didn't need
right.
height.
And then they sent a letter, backing off of that, right?
Right.
So, so hopefully we're going to build a great market. It's going to have good access to the waterfront. It's going to help activate the waterfront. And, I'm not going to object to the height. So,
Any other discussion on Morrison?
No.
So are we good with heights as amended to look at this bonus for both commercial and housing?
Yeah. The only other thing I would add to that is I'm not sure that housing should be the only approach. I think there are things that developers can do, other things that developers potentially can do to improve access to the river. And I think we just need to be more open and more creative about that in addition to housing. For me, the social goal here is to have a larger number of people feeling very connected to the river and fiercely protecting it. That's what we're really, I think, trying to achieve as a matter of public policy. And so we need to look at a lot of ways of doing that. And I think Teresa and I had a conversation a few weeks ago that, not everybody loves just being in this open space that's now Tom McCall Park, that there needs to be other things there. And so I think we need to explore and achieve some of that in order to have the larger goal of protecting the river.
And the underlying zoning would allow both commercial and residential, so it doesn't make that call, and we'll look at both types of uses in the bonus study.
Okay. So is there a motion on the table? So just to review, we are good with the housing, good with the height, good with the west end, good with the Appendix D, and then good with the environmental issues. Are we?
Yeah, I move that we express a position of support for all those items at this point, and that we've pretty much finalized our recommendations to staff.
Second.
It's moved and seconded. Discussion? No? Julie, vote.
Aye?
House,
Aye.
Oxman,
Yes.
Smith,
yes.
St. Martin,
Yes.
Talmadge,
Yes.
Law.
Yes.
Thank you.
We have passed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The
Good
next
work.
item. That's my agenda. Is green infrastructure. And Amy?
Well, we are an hour behind here, and so I'm embarrassed, I should have broken in 45 minutes ago just to get a little reality check. Are the commissioners planning on hanging in there to?
Yes.
Because people have put a lot of effort into the presentation. I don't want to wind up with 2 or 3 commissioners sitting around.
I'm staying.
Do we, Gary, are you,
Because we have a good hour presentation.
how long can you stay?
I might be, I'm waiting to hear back on something. I have another commitment at 5:30, but I might.
And then,
Okay, well, we'll be
There's
out of
some
here at 5:15. We'll be done at
Tim?
5:15.
So we would still have a quorum, even.
We'd
Okay.
still have a
Even if
quorum,
Gary
yeah.
has to
Are you-
take off.
Teresa? Okay.
okay, is Robin here?
I'm here.
Can you guys,
I can stay until about 5:10.
Okay. Well, we've got a quorum till then.
okay, let's do it. I was going to suggest we might put it off till another time and put it first on the agenda, but if people are willing to stick in there and.
They've been
And
waiting.
they've been here.
They've been here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is actually a continuation of, there was a presentation the Bureau of Environmental Services made in March. They were coming back today to continue that conversation about a very important topic, which is important both for the various bureaus, and the comp plan is replete with references to green infrastructure. And a lot of people really do not have a clear understanding of what we're talking about with regard to green infrastructure and why it's so important. So in addition to the Bureau of Environmental Services, actually the suggestion of Jackie Dingfelder in the mayor's office, we had a conversation with the Columbia Green Technologies folks. They're doing work all over North America with regard to green roofs in particular, but green infrastructure more generally. So we have Tim Kurtz, who's acting manager for the Sustainable Stormwater Management Program in the Bureau of Environmental Services, Robin Schneider, marketing director, Columbia Green Technologies, to do a little duet here. And then we have some other folks, and I'm not sure who all's in the room. I see Tom Lipton, who is just retired from the Bureau of Environmental Services, who's done basically created the Green Roof Program in the city of Portland. For Q&A afterwards, Todd LeBeau, Jill Sherman, I don't see Jill, one of our former colleagues here, and Brian Heather are here to participate in the Q&A portion.
Okay.
So I'll shut up now and let Tim take it away.
I want to thank you for your patience and waiting here still. We had some work to do, and unfortunately it took a little long, but thank you very much.
Those are all green activities.
Right.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of
There
good
we go.
stuff here.
Yeah.
Great. Oh,
Uh-oh. Are we going to have the same problem?
Well, actually, we see it downstairs, but the projector doesn't like the resolution.
Sorry.
Technology is not our, we are not masters.
And as another little intro, just for killing time here, it's interesting that when Tom started his work on green roofs, I think people thought, I think the first one he put in was on his garage at home. And I think it was viewed as a little eccentric at one point in time. And the irony is he's better known in Europe, in Philadelphia and Chicago and other cities, or has been until fairly recently. And the Bureau has really done a fabulous job of moving from just putting water in pipes to watershed health programs, green infrastructure, and to this day, EPA lists the city of Portland as one of the leaders in the nation. And the question is, are we still on the leading edge, or actually have other people caught up with us and maybe are surpassing us? And I think it's one of the messages that will come out in this presentation eventually. And should acknowledge Professor Liberty from Portland State University is here today to partake in this. This is not good.
Well, at least we didn't kill any trees.
All right, what did I miss?
Final thing.
yeah, I got it. Yep.
Do we have a fix coming? Yeah. Oh, good.
Keep talking, Mike.
Well, I will keep talking, actually. One of the other reasons for having this presentation to you folks is to get the word out to other policymakers, especially elected officials. If you'll remember, we just thumped an effort to take the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Water Bureau away from the city by folks, big water users, and some other folks who, in fact, don't have an appreciation for the role that green infrastructure can play, especially with regard to managing stormwater and watershed health. And I think it's really critical that we take a responsibility for trying to educate folks about the fact that the stormwater rates are it's perfectly reasonable to use stormwater rates and sewer rates to address broader issues through the use of green infrastructure, which in fact turns out to be less expensive and gives many more benefits to the community. So a part of the reason for this presentation is to start pushing back on the lack of information regarding the importance of green infrastructure in addressing stormwater and other issues. And now we're ready to go.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Houck, for that very nice introduction and the time filling as well, which you're very good at, so that's great. And commissioners, thanks for hanging in there for a long afternoon. I appreciate that. So I'll get into it here. So as Mike said, there was some staff here that presented back in March and kind of gave a Stormwater 101 and how it related to development and land use planning throughout the city. And primary issues, of course, we start to develop, we put impervious area out there and we get too much runoff coming in too fast and with lots of pollutants in it. And it causes all these various problems that we have to deal with for stormwater management. And it could certainly be a challenging situation, especially in urban environments. So today I just wanted to go over a little bit of green infrastructure, what we call it in the city of Portland, why it's such a valuable tool in the toolbox is, again, because stormwater management can be so challenging. The more tools we have, the better we're able to meet the needs. And then show some pretty pictures of some projects that have been implemented out there, both public and private. Start touching a little bit on performance and cost. There's a fair amount of information, but short period of time, we'll just do a little bit. And then where do we go from here? And set the table for Robin to talk a little bit more about green roofs in particular. So for what is green infrastructure, I'm an engineer, I like to build things, so we often think of built green infrastructure like green streets, eco-roofs, planters, swales, things of that sort, but it's also the natural systems out there as well, so protecting, enhancing, restoring our natural areas, our canopies, our waterways that are out there as well. So all these things to serve stormwater management, but of course so much more than that, to serve for public space, public health and safety, and all the eco-services that go with that. So why do we love green infrastructure and why do we promote it so much? Well, it's because it does a lot of things for us all in one. So talked again about too much, too fast, and too dirty. Green infrastructure can manage all those things at once. So one green street, if you think about it, it's infiltrating the water, taking the volume away, it's slowing it down as it passes through the plants and the soils, and it's also filtering pollutants out as well. So we can do it all at once. With some of our older techniques, gray techniques, we would have to have maybe one system to do each one of those things, and so we'd end up with redundant systems. It could provide us a lot of flexibility too as we go through development challenges. We need to maintain capacity in our public system, so this allows us to do that. If we're working in brownfields, for instance, where we might have a cap that can't be penetrated, we can't do a traditional pipe system underground, and so if we do surface green infrastructure facilities, we can make that work. And also in some places, we just don't have the existing infrastructure for stormwater. And so if we have the site conditions that are correct, we can actually allow development on sites that wouldn't otherwise be developable without green infrastructure. As Commissioner Houck mentioned, it often is cheaper. That's not always the case, but we always try to make sure we look at the life cycle costing of what we do. Green is an option for us. We also look at our gray infrastructure options as well. And we try to look at what it's going to look like, not just when we're building it initially, but what it'll look like with maintenance and ongoing operations as time goes by. Sometimes it may be cheaper to build and then more expensive to maintain, so making that determination. Or it also might be the opposite, where there might be an upfront initial cost to build, but it might provide many benefits as we go by. So that's the flip side of we have the cost, and then we have the benefits. So we're getting the stormwater benefits, but there are also so many other things we're getting to, the human health components, air quality, urban heat island, access to nature, the biophilic cities concept. Dr. Beatley of the University of Virginia is championing about our need to be near nature, both physically and emotionally, and all those other things too, habitat, groundwater, extending the life of assets out there. And one thing that I'll focus quite a bit on is just the partnerships too that we have. We started out with this with the stormwater bent. That's what we do as a bureau. But there are opportunities to engage planning and sustainability with parks, transportation, water bureau, Metro, other agencies in the region to accomplish things together. And that's really been something that's manifested itself over the last 10 years of implementing green infrastructure. So just real quickly, going through the surfaces we're trying to manage, streets, 45% of that impervious area out there is what we're driving around on in the public rights of way. And so many different ways to do that. We have our basins, curb extensions, planters, and swales that we can do. The top two there, Glencoe and Siskiyou, are two of the first programmatic ones we did in sustainable stormwater back in 2003. Maybe a dozen or so green streets back then. Today, 11 years later, I think we have about 1,400 green streets out there. It's hard not to be driving around the city and find one. So. Parking lots, of course, about 15% of our impervious area is parking areas. So again, using very similar tools to what we'd use in the streets, the planters, swales, basins, things of that sort. Also able to throw in a little bit of pervious pavement there as well to manage those surfaces. And then the roof surface, about 45%, pretty similar to the street area that we have out there in the city to manage that as well. So the eco roofs in various parts of the city I think we have 600 or very close to 600 now. And I think they're managing about 40 or so acres throughout the city. And then something that we often don't think of as green infrastructure, but the urban canopy we have out there as well. This is the Clay Street project, which was just completed not that long ago. So planting trees in a commercial industrial area with very little tree canopy coverage. And there on the lower left is a picture of Sandy and 9th. It's a stormwater facility going in. Where we're actually testing out a grid system to provide extra room for roots for trees. So that grid system, the sidewalk will actually be laid right over the top of that, and underneath it is soil. And so when the tree is planted where that rake is laying off to the right there, it'll provide more room for the tree's roots to go into the sidewalk without cracking the sidewalk and allow the tree to grow bigger and healthier than it would otherwise.
Is that one of the sites where Sandy's at an angle?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. This is right near the end where it's just about to end, where it does its 7th. So it's about 8th and 9th on Sandy. And there are natural systems too. This is an aerial view of the Foster floodplain work that was just recently completed, but also understanding that our creeks and streams, of course, need their room to roam here. And of course, we can see the tree canopy coverage here, the things that are great about that. And then also restoring our waterways. And this is Crystal Springs, a tributary of Johnson Creek, and home for some of our listed salmon species. There have been 9 culverts, I believe, that were blocking fish passage up Crystal Springs, and there have been projects to remove 7 of those and plans for the last 2 here in the next couple of years. And just recently, I think the end of October or so, one of our fisheries biologists was out there and caught a great video of a pair of coho that were spawning in the Crystal Springs there, probably for the first time in many years. It's great to get this kind of immediate feedback to doing this kind of work. We also do a lot of other things, as I mentioned, with partnerships. Transportation was a very early one for us 10 years or so ago, trying to incorporate safety. They had Safe Routes to School programs, so improving crossing safety by extending out into the street. We're shortening the crossing distance, making the fact that there's a crossing there much more visible. We have Sandy there again on the upper left, where we're cutting diagonally through a grid system. So we have these triangular areas that were causing some confusion for drivers out there. And so by closing those off, it makes it much more clear where people should be. And it creates kind of a sense of civic corridor identity, too. There are about 9 facilities like this that are now stretched between 15th and 78th on Sandy there. And again, I mentioned the school. There we have in the lower left, doing a lot of work around there to improve safety and crossing, and the bikes as well. A number of facilities trying to improve bike safety throughout the city. Space constraints are very common in the urban area, so trying to adjust to that, making things skinny, pushing them up against the buildings, having them above ground in many cases instead of in the ground to accommodate things. And parking is always a big concern in the urban environment, pretty much everywhere we go. So coming up with new designs like these eggs or footballs in the lower right there, trying to preserve as much parking as possible. And then here we're on to the pretty picture part of the presentation. So this is the building that I work in, just down the street a little ways, Portland building, and what it looks like today. We needed to replace the roof about 8 years ago now. This is a project we just completed. Metro, as a partner, along with the EPA in the form of a grant, we were able to create a vertical eco-roof. There are green walls out there that people have put in for cooling, for aesthetics, that type of thing. As far as we know, this might be one of the first gravity, or the first gravity green wall out there. So in some cases, these larger roofs, they don't have the structural capacity to actually put an eco-roof on top. Can we actually bring it off the roof, put it on the side wall, and see how well they work? And so this one is going to be monitored. It was went online back in October, so we're starting to gather data to see exactly how well it performs and get an idea of the cost benefit of managing stormwater this way.
Cost differential between a flat one and that one?
It's hard to say at this point. I mean, but I believe this project was in the $160,000 range, for instance, and it's managing about 10,000 square feet. So that's about $16 a square foot. So it's a little high. We've had an incentive program that went from 2009 to 2013, and we're just now starting to crunch the data from about 135 projects from that one. And I believe the average cost is about $8 to $12 a square foot, above and beyond, so a little bit more. This one clearly is a very large and very robust structure as well. It's freestanding. It's actually not attached to the wall, and that what was required for the structure there. So there certainly is an opportunity to scale this and look at different ways of doing it. But we'd like to see the data, see how well it works, and then we can start tweaking with it. I'll talk about some of the monitoring and kind of research that we do in these projects as well. So and here's another, I believe that's Tom Lipton right there walking through there. Yeah, I think it is. Albina Triangle, this is a PDC project in North Portland, what it looks like afterwards. Owens Corning in the Northwest Industrial Area. Look like afterwards. This is River East, so just across the river at Water and Clay, and after it was redeveloped. And then Northeast Holman Park's Pocket Park project. It's a partnership between Parks, Transportation, and BES. And what it looks like here, it was close to traffic, so it was only bike and pedestrian traffic going through, and a much nicer park space there as well, along with the stormwater management. We do monitoring. This is something that I do near and dear to my heart. I like to go out there and play with the fire hydrants and do fun things. So we do all sorts of kind of monitoring. We'll monitor with sensors that are in the sewers and in the downspouts, and it'll just monitor 24/7, 365 days a year, so we get a good idea of what things look like through all sorts of weather, seasons, storm events. We also simulate events, so that upper left picture there, I think that's Tom in the yellow coat again. He's in a lot of these photos. Wasn't intentional. But we get to hook up to fire hydrants, and we can actually simulate different storm patterns so that we can, if we want to know what would happen in a combined sewer overflow design storm event, we can actually simulate one and estimate what would happen. So it gives us a lot of feedback, not only on how well they perform just from a volume, peak flow, water quality perspective, but also how the water moves through them, what we can do to try to make them easier to maintain, what kind of design tweaks in different settings. If we're in an industrial environment, do we need to do things a little bit different? It allows us to really get hands-on with the facilities and understand how to feed that back into the planning, the design, and the construction that we'll do later. So I won't go, and I have all sorts of graphs that I just love to show, but I just have two up here right now just to kind of show the sample of it. Glencoe Elementary Rain Garden is one of the first ones we did. There was a severe basement sewer backup problem in southeast Portland. About 6 to 8 homes would have this stormwater sewage mixture bubbling up into their basements about once every 2 years. And our protection standard as a bureau is every 25 years. So it was a very serious situation, and we were told to solve this problem immediately. We chose to put in a large rain garden in the basin. And we were able to monitor before. The gray line there is the rainfall and the amount of runoff that we would expect to be created by that rainfall. And then the black is what we're actually metering going into the sewer. So on the left there, before we built it, we did some monitoring for about 9 months. The rain fell and it ran right off. We pretty much have a direct relationship to that. And then after construction, you can see that black line, which is the amount going into the sewer, really just completely dropped off. And so over the 9 years shown here, 86% of what came into the facility did not leave it. So just extremely effective, no backups in any of those homes since this project was completed. So really just a hallmark success. And this is not uncommon. Other facilities we've monitored, we see very similar, 80 to 85% retention.
How big is that site?
I believe the site is about 1,900 square feet. It's managing a little under an acre.
And we just put $1.44 billion in that big pipe, and what that's showing is trying to keep that water out to maintain the capacity of that huge investment.
And then just to give Green Roofs their due too, they're great at reducing peak flows. This is a thunderstorm events. These thunderstorm events that typically are responsible for the basement sewer backups. We just have so much water trying to push in so quickly it pressurizes the sewer. So seeing the rate at which the water is coming into the sewer drop off is really important. So that light gray line again is the rain and what we would expect to see from flows coming off, hundreds of liters per minute. We would have expected. We got 10 liters per minute coming off the roof for this. And again, that's not unusual for all the roofs we've monitored.
Hamilton is like a typical quarter block downtown development, right?
I believe that's correct.
Yeah, about 10,000.
Quarter block, yeah. Yeah, I think the roof that we're monitoring, there are two sections of it, and I think they're each about 3,500 square feet, somewhere in that 3,000, 3,500 square feet. So 10,000 square foot per minute makes sense. We do a lot of monitoring. If there's anybody out there who's really interested in it, we do publish our results up there. So I thought I'd just do a shout out to this. 2010 is the latest available. 2013 will be up soon. And then just a quick run through of some business cases. OMSI, way back when in the early 90s when OMSI was relocating across the river, they were going to build the big parking lots to hold all the families that were going to go there, and they needed to do some stormwater management. So staff worked with them and talked about potential options. They looked at doing the traditional catch basin and pipe system or doing swales. In this particular case, they saved $78,000 by doing the swales. Large project, not a huge number, but it's definitely something that was a savings, and they viewed it as an amenity to the site, which is great. Private property, in the early days of our CSO program, in the early 90s, we needed to get as much water off the system as possible. And so we started looking at residential roof in the combined sewer area as being a great way to do that. So just a lot of canvassing, a lot of outreach to folks in the neighborhoods, trying to get them to disconnect those pipes from directly into the sewer out onto the surface. So out on their lawns, into rain gardens, planters, whatever we could do to get it out there. Amazingly successful program. It ran until 2011, cost about $13 million. But we removed about 20% of the total volume we were trying to remove for the combined sewer system through it. So the tunnel was able, on the east side of the river, was able to be substantially smaller than it would have had to have been otherwise. So at least $200 million in savings in tunnel costs there. So just hugely cost effective. Tabor to the River, one of our largest, or I guess our largest combined sewer basin. A lot of basement sewer backup risk here, a lot of older pipes as well need to be worked on. So in 2000, we did a pre-design to look at what it would take to create a system there that would work. It was an all-pipe system. It was so expensive, we decided to hold off for a little while as we started to integrate more of our green infrastructure in. We did it again in 2006. And it was just a hugely different price for the whole thing. It's enabling us, the green's enabling us to keep infrastructure in the ground that may be undersized, but it still has life left. It still has maybe 20 or 30 years of life left. So instead of having to upsize all the pipe under the street just to make it bigger to carry it, we can put green streets on the street. We can work with private property owners on their roofs and their parking lots to reduce the amount of flow going into the pipes to make those pipes then work again.
This is in my neighborhood. I live at the top of that basin at 59th and Lincoln. It's really made a difference.
That's great to hear.
We used to flood a lot more.
Oh, great.
And I think that this kind of collection of small improvements can solve big problems.
It certainly can. It certainly can. It's good to hear. And then Tryon Headwaters, a large development in southwest Portland. This is what the site looked like before development. It was underused site. And the developer really wanted to go above and beyond. So certainly not something that happens all the time, but they truly viewed that if the site was made an amenity, that they'd have lower vacancy, rates than they would otherwise. It has a mixture of low income and market rate housing, but the market rate housing could be higher. It would be a desirable place to be. They did a daylit the stream, brought it back to the surface again, put eco roofs on the structure, planters for the roofs and the parking areas. There's pervious pavement there. There's a large public rain garden here that's shown there. It's really quite a showcase. We often tour with folks on this site because there's a little bit of everything there. And then just kind of in conclusion, mentioned Philadelphia earlier, and this is when they're getting a great deal of attention for what they're doing, and deservedly so with green infrastructure. But Howard was very kind to say when he came to visit Portland to see how we were doing things was really when he started to believe that it could be done that way. It was very difficult for us with the Environmental Protection Agency when we were first doing our CSO program. I think it's now become just assumed that most cities that are doing their combined sewer overflow programs now are going to be using green infrastructure in what they do. We have visitors from all over the country, all over the world. I think we had to pull some information together for the Blue Ribbon Commission a month or so ago. I think we had 25 international groups come through in the last 18 months looking for tours. We have countless requests, emails, phone calls, that type of thing, of what we're doing, both planning, designing, constructing, and maintaining. We've had these facilities for a lot longer than most municipalities have, so we have a great body of knowledge. But there's still more to do. I sometimes hear even in our own bureau, well, we've kind of figured it out now. It's part of the way we do business, but there's still a lot more to do. We can be more cost effective with what we do. That continuing monitoring and innovation, coming up with new tools is very important. The stormwater system planning is really just getting going. We've spent a lot of time focused on our combined and our sanitary sewers. Now we're really starting to focus on our storm sewers more. Street by street, figuring out ways to do stormwater management on unimproved streets in a cost-effective way is very important. Finding ways to serve areas that are currently not served and how we can allow development in those places will be huge components of that. And of course, you've been hearing a lot about Central City and the mixed-use zoning project, and bringing that multiple benefit use of landscape and vegetation in there, using it for stormwater and for also placemaking as well. And we have climate change potentially too. The city has a climate action plan and a climate change preparation strategy, and certainly green infrastructure will play a role in that as well. So just really the take home is that working together has been huge. We've had lots of partners along the way with this, and again, starting out with really just managing our stormwater as we need to do as a bureau, but recognizing now that everybody can be involved. It crosses boundaries. Green infrastructure is not just ours, it's everyone's. And it goes beyond our regions as well. And if, as you're reviewing plans and we're talking about how to integrate things in for stormwater to make the multiple benefits work for everyone, it's going to be better and smarter for everyone too. And really just appreciate your support as these things come through. So thank you. That's it for me.
Great. We were going to do Q&A, but I think in deference to Robin's schedule, we
I
should
actually managed to get an emergency childcare pickup from my husband. So.
Good guy.
So if you do have questions, go for it.
Okay. Any quick questions for Tim?
Those are great images. It's nice to know that you're doing this vigorous monitoring, because that's what really proves it out. And that's how you convince other people to do it.
It is. I love the pretty pictures, which are great, but it's also nice to be able to have the data to show that this is more than that, and it really is a serious, we call it green infrastructure for a reason. I mean, it is something we truly believe is part of our stormwater management system.
So I'm working on a district in Vancouver right now, and it floods. It's low. And it's not flooding because of what the city did with their street system. It's flooding because of what the private owners have done with their industrial sites. And a lot of these measures could address that issue. Really good.
That's true.
So I want to make sure. Kat said she wasn't going to be here today, and she was very explicit about wanting to know. Robin, you may delve into this in your presentation. The upfront costs. She was expressing concern over how much this, like green roofs, for example. I think it came up during the presentation. Can you say anything about? For example, I know Tom makes the argument that, yeah, there may be some additional upfront costs, but in terms of green roofs, for example, the maintenance over a long term is much reduced. You want to throw any comments out on costs?
You want to go, or you want me to?
Sure, you can go. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I will go into this in my presentation, but there are a number of different factors that go into.
Speak into the mic.
I'm sorry. That go into the upfront cost of the green roof, as well as the payback period. Incentives, obviously, are one of them, but also things like the ability to demand increases in rent if it's a multifamily housing development. There are also things like reduced costs and energy consumption coming from the green roof. The roof itself has less exposure to the elements, so it needs to be replaced 2 or 3 times less often. So the overall cost and return on investment calculation can come out sort of all over the map, but most studies say that the return on investment comes within at most 6 years. And for example, even Walmart, who you would think would be
very cost-sensitive customer is employing green roofs on their buildings, and they see a return on investment between 0 to 3 years.
And I think with a Walmart situation, it's because it saves space too.
Yes.
You use that roof area for stormwater, you save site space, because they develop at a low FAR with surface parking. That becomes very meaningful to them.
Yes, the cost studies are very convoluted in the sense that they take into account pre-existing incentives like that are already in place, say for stormwater, and then mix them with other returns like the cost savings that you would get from, say, doing a green roof rather than a retention tank or that sort of thing. So it's really hard to piece out the individual contributors. Do you have any other comments?
No, I think that covers it. I know that I've heard from our folks that sometimes the fact that the longevity of the roof is there is a huge one for me. I mean, it's doubling or more the life of the roof. It has to be a major factor. But I know sometimes the buildings are built by a developer who are then not going to own the building moving forward. And so sometimes that can be difficult. And finding a way to get past maybe that in some way, shape, or form would be very helpful. I'm not sure what that way is, but that is one of those obstacles for looking at that long-term benefit. Even if it's a few years, it might be too long for some.
Yeah, that's a good point, is that we often see green roofs implemented most commonly on facilities like healthcare facilities or education facilities, universities, where there is this long-term sense of ownership and ability to understand the overall cost in a long-term sense and building maintenance over long-term energy savings and so on, where things like residential housing buildings that are done as an investment and the ownership's not as long-term, it's harder to make the case.
Other questions?
Maybe you addressed this and I didn't hear, but is there a direct financial benefit in terms of sewerage fees for people who hook up to green infrastructure?
We do have the Clean River Rewards program, and so people are able to go online and register what types of green infrastructure they're doing on their property, and they can get a discount on their stormwater fee. It's currently 35% is the maximum of their stormwater fee that they can get reduced. So the way they split the
35% reduction in stormwater fee?
A reduction, yes. So the way the fee is currently structured, 65% manages the right-of-way throughout the city, and then 35% is meant to manage the water on the tax lot. So you can have that total private tax lot 35% deducted, but currently they can't go past that. We still have the 65% for the right-of-way.
Go ahead, Teresa.
Very excellent work. And what I was wondering is if there was anything you would ask from us to help maintain that motivation and keep things moving forward.
Well, I think that will be part of what Robin covers in hers as well. You know, it was a different feeling, I'll say, 4 years ago. There was just kind of this real momentum to it. Greater Green was there, which I think helped quite a bit. But I think acknowledging that there is still more for us to do is important. To say that we're not there. Yes, we're implementing green streets out there, but just acknowledging that there might be more that could be done, and that there are communities that are doing more. And I think Robin's going to touch on that a little bit, and to see what that might look like would be very interesting, I think, and very beneficial.
Okay, great. I guess,
Okay.
Robin, you're up.
All right, thanks.
Well, we'll see. There's another one here. Let's see. Yes.
Do you have the video?
The video.
Oh. Do you want the video first?
Yeah, I think so.
You have it up already?
Filling in again. You saw that big floodplain area on Johnson Creek. For the first time in years, Foster did not flood as a function of a lot of the work that BS and others have been doing out there. So I think there's another economic issue here with regard to the ability to actually realize development in an area where there probably shouldn't be development in large portions of the Lentz area along Johnson Creek. But not having the flooding on Foster is a huge economic issue, I think, in southeast Portland. I don't know. Has it flooded recently? I mean, it used to flood every year, literally.
Yeah,
We
not
had
to-
some pretty big events, and it did not flood.
Yeah, I believe there was a big one in 2011 that everybody said
Maria's
normally would have
shaking her
been.
head no back there.
Yeah, and so it's great.
But it used to go over Foster Road all the time.
Yeah, right.
Do you want information about that?
Yeah.
Across all facilities.
Marie Walkowitz, Bureau of Environmental Services. I'm on the Johnson Creek Watershed team, and you may recognize me from some of the comp plan presentations because I'm also a liaison to that effort. The Foster Floodplain Natural Area is in Lentz, just east of I-205. It's about 50 acres. It's bigger than Laurelhurst Park. It was designed to mitigate the flood to a 6 to 8 year event, which so every 6 to 8 years on average, we could expect flooding to overflow that site, which sounds modest, except for in that area, Foster was flooding every other year. So since it's been in place, we haven't experienced any flooding. We expect it's going to make a big difference. Actually, preventing flooding in that area altogether would require a much bigger effort.
Another equity issue as well. If you think about outer southeast.
It's a fish.
Okay, so quick lead in. We talked about some of the benefits of green infrastructure in general, but this video speaks to green roofs in particular, and it's a great lead in. Don't mess with it.
I won't touch it again.
There was an opportunity here to do this. We've got about 7,000 feet of roof. In addition to the ceiling, we do have boxes full of trees that are looking on top of the posts. On top of the beams, we have some richer soil mixes and some berms that can support some plants that need to have more of a root structure.
Green roofing is basically the addition of soil and plants and layers of drainage on a building. The biggest financial return is in extending the life of your roof membrane. That's true across all facilities. When you add vegetation to the rooftop, you're extending the life of the roof membrane by double or triple. Healthcare facilities really benefit from on-structure vegetation by energy savings. In addition to the patient benefits of viewing nature, it helps them manage stormwater on their facility, and it limits disruption to the facility's operations through patching and repairing and replacing their roofs because it extends the life of the membrane. Traditional roofing is really hot. It gets up to like 180 degrees on a hot day, and so that's going down into your building. It's contributing to the urban heat island effect. When sunlight hits a plant, it never turns into heat. It turns into photosynthesis. It turns into sugar. So you're not getting this heat island effect. Plants and soil also evaporate water, and that has a cooling effect.
The shop and the building underneath stays cooler in the summertime and seems to require less fuel to heat in the winter.
My name's Augustine Enriquez. I was the design lead for the Janney Apartments. We looked at a number of ways to treat stormwater. That's a requirement by the city of Portland. The owner also was interested in having a rooftop amenity space for the tenants. And in order to have residents not look out over basically roofing, it was a real natural reason to provide an eco roof that was something to look at. As residents are going out and they're looking at 5, 6, 7 other buildings around town, this is a really easy thing to identify and get excited about. This building leased up faster than any other building they've been involved with. So in 2 or 3 months, it leased up for the highest rents in the city. So there's a real value from an owner's perspective.
Vegetated roofing has a significant effect on human health. There are studies that show in a clinical setting where vegetated roofing actually affects clinical outcomes. Less stress, lower blood pressure, less use of narcotic pain medication. The benefits of vegetated roofing include providing a native habitat, allowing a space in urban areas for the reintroduction of native plants.
Right now, things have started to bloom. It's the middle of June, and the sedum are blooming like crazy. So we get a lot of bees, we get a lot of hummingbirds, which are, of course, a lot of fun to watch. It's not as complicated as you might think. It's really simple. The benefits far outweigh the effort that went into it.
We're going to run into the same damn problem. No.
Okay. Great. I'm Robin Schneider. I'm the marketing director for Columbia Green. And for those of you who don't know who we are, we're a local green roof technology company, basically a startup founded about 5 or 6 years ago. And so I'm here to represent the private green building industry. And that was a great lead-in for the benefits of green roofs in general. But what I want to talk about is what are the economic incentives from a general job creation, city economics point of view. And then also what has Portland done right and what are some of our successes and where are we failing and what can we do to get our private green building industry to thrive a little bit more, in particular in the context of green roofs. So that video went through a number of different benefits to green roofs, absorbing stormwater, reducing the heat island effect, providing habitat, and then also, as we discussed earlier, being a really efficient use of land for those benefits, as opposed to bioswales and so on, which can take up valuable parking space. Green roofs really don't have that sacrifice. They also create healthy places for people to live and work. And I feel like the video actually de-emphasized a little bit that value in terms of things like in healthcare. There was a study, and I think it was Science Magazine recently, showing the decrease in recovery time for patients in hospitals when they had a view of nature. And so we've seen a large implementation in hospitals and assisted living facilities and things like that. There was a report put out, I think it was 2 years ago, called Banking on Green, which actually featured our Multnomah County Library. It was a national study looking at 450 different green infrastructure programs. And of those, 75% were either net neutral or net positive in terms of implementing green infrastructure over gray infrastructure. So Portland is featured on the cover of that study, and we'd like to see Portland maintain its position at the forefront of green innovation, and in addition, provide jobs and economic growth for the local economy. So I'll talk about that in just the next slide. So green roofs do provide job creation and job growth. There is a analyst company called Lux Research based out of New York City that puts out research on green roofs in particular. And a couple of years ago, they put out a study projecting the green roof industry in North America to be at $2 billion by 2017. And actually, the international industry would be at $5.5 billion by that date as well. They also said that covering even about 1% of large buildings in America's medium to large cities with vegetated roofs could create over 190,000 jobs. And also as part of that study, they showed that about 75 to 80 cents on every dollar of spending in the green roof industry goes to job creation in design, construction, maintenance, plant growing, all of that stuff. And their findings are backed up by the industry consortium Green Roofs for Healthy Cities, which polls its members every year. It's a national organization. And they've shown this exponential growth of square footage of green roofs over the last 10 years is on that graph. And then we've seen even private sector doing research into their return on investment using green roofs. And so, for example, I mentioned earlier that Walmart, you can see here they're groundbreaking for the green roof in Portland, has seen a return on investment of about 0 to 3 years for the green roofs that they've implemented. And I wish I could remember how many stores it's on off the top of my head, but unfortunately. So here's a little bit more about Columbia Green. So we're sort of the economic success story or poster child. We are headquartered in Portland. We have sales offices in both Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., and I think you'll see why in a couple of slides. Those cities are, and some of the others on the East Coast, are basically the biggest markets for green roofs now. We're basically part of a local network of specialized vendors in nurseries, specialty soil, landscaping. Our products are manufactured for the most part locally in Washougal. We have, over the years, partnered with organizations like Oregon Best and Portland State University to do research in the commercialization of our products. And so it's not just a success story for Columbia Green, but also I think Portland and Oregon coming together to show that we are able to have innovation in the green building industry. In 2011, we were awarded an award by the Department of Commerce for small business exporting. We've experienced 200% growth over the last several years and in fact ranked 13th in the Portland Business Journal's list of fastest growing privately held companies. We currently have about 12 people in the Portland area, but we did just receive venture funding for growth as well. So green roofs, green building are getting interest on every level of government. Our CEO was appointed about a little more than a year ago, to the President's Export Council, where she is representing green building and small business. Other members of that council, there are 27 CEOs. They're coming from Dow, Boeing, Ford, et cetera, representing their industries. So, for example, Lockheed Martin is representing the aerospace industry. And we're there to represent green building and small businesses. So I think that says a lot about where Portland stands. So Portland was the first city to have an established eco-roof or green roof program. The incentives in Portland have included everything from stormwater fee reductions to floor area ratio density bonuses to direct incentives. And the direct incentive, I think, maybe has been the most important. During that 2008 to 2013 time period that we had that $5 per square foot incentive, there were 134 projects installed covering 162,000 some odd square feet. And then as of October 2014, Portland has 579 green roofs covering more than 1.5 million square feet. Most of these have been implemented in the urban core, and I'm going to just show you a few examples of our successes. So you saw some of these in the video. There's the Mirabella on the bottom, and I can't remember what that is on the right. But, oh, the Linden Apartments, yes, thank you. I could look at the screen, apparently. So anyway, you can see they're being implemented all over the city. And in fact, the city received in 2013 the Green Roof Leadership Award from the International Green Roof Association for some of these works. Again, the Multnomah County Library, the Janney, Fred Meyer, and the Port of Portland. So that Fred Meyer was just actually installed a couple months ago, actually. And in that award, they actually noted that Portland's work to promote green roofs is encouraging other cities around the world to adopt the technology to manage stormwater. And one of the things that I think was really interesting is in that acceptance, and I'm afraid I can't remember who this quote was from, but basically said, now we need to show how to stay at the forefront and keep implementing green roofs. And so unfortunately, in the last few years, we've seen a lot of really prominent buildings that do not feature green roofs. For example, this very large development in Northeast Portland, Grant Park Village, many of the new buildings in the Pearl District, and most of the buildings on North Williams, which have, I'm sure as you all know, many, many multifamily residential buildings going up. And most of them do not have any green roofs at all.
Is it a requirement if you do a building it as public funding or any form of subsidy that there be a green roof?
We do have a green building policy, and it does mention eco roofs in there. So if we're doing a new public building or retrofitting the roof of the building, you need to look at an eco roof. It's not an outright requirement.
So it's kind of a menu item of potential items you
That's
can
correct.
perform. Okay.
And whether it's a requirement or not is something I hope we may take up at some point.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, are there jurisdictions across the nation where it is a requirement now? Have you?
Yes, I'll
encountered
get into that in
practice?
just a few
great, thank you.
slides. So there are a lot of challenges to implementation. Probably first and foremost is the initial upfront cost, which can range from $5 to $25 a square foot approximately. Personally, I think it's important that we all remember that there are a large variety of different types of green roofs that can go on. So in some cases, you're really kind of apples and oranges. There are very low-tech, extensive green roofs that can be done relatively inexpensively and still do a very good job in terms of stormwater management. And then there are these intensive or very complex roof gardens, which obviously have a lot more cost. Then there's a lot about education, because often there are multiple stakeholders involved: the private developer, the building owner, the designer, there's the landscape architect, the civil engineer, et cetera. And sometimes they don't necessarily have a good handle on what their options are in terms of green building infrastructure in general, including eco roofs. So that education piece is really important. And a lot of it could be mitigated with things like low interest loans, grant programs, and different incentive programs that can lower the return on investment for the building owner. Also, I should point out that the cost of the green roof, the upfront cost, is falling significantly as the market's maturing. So that Lux research report that was put out about the size of the green roof market overall, the original report, I think, was put out in 2012 and speculated the green roof market to be at $7 billion worldwide by 2017. They've actually downgraded it to $5.5 billion, not because of lower square footage speculation, but because the overall costs are coming down so much. So we do need to educate the building owners about what the payback period could be. Like I said, studies show anywhere from 0 to 6 years, depending on various factors. one of the most important ones being the life of the roof membrane, the reduction in stormwater management costs, creating attractive amenity spaces for higher rents and less turnover. And in fact, the National Resource Defense Council put out a study saying that apartment buildings with green roofs actually could demand a 16% premium. The energy efficiency is also very important, marketability, obviously, and then local policy and incentives. And so what we're going to do now is actually compare what some of the other cities across the country, or across North America, I should say, are doing in order to incentivize building owners to put green roofs on. So unfortunately, you can't see the top of this slide here, but what it says is the top 10 North American metro regions in square feet installing green roofs in 2013. So obviously Washington, D.C. is by far the leader, then Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Denver, Baltimore, Toronto, Montreal, and Calgary. And to know where Portland sits, we could look at the 2012 list, and Portland was ranked number 14, just behind Quebec City. And I wanted to call out that we're just behind Quebec City because I think it's easy to say, well, Washington, D.C., Chicago, New York, these are all booming metropolitan areas. But even places like Quebec City, Madison, Wisconsin, smaller municipalities are actually having a lot of work in green infrastructure, and I don't want us to sort of fall behind them.
So what's DC doing differently?
We'll get into that in just a sec.
And do you have this on a per capita basis so we could normalize it to population?
I do not. I guess it wouldn't be that hard to do. But yeah, I mean, I can take that as an action item if you'd like.
Curious to see where we rate when we normalize it.
Mm-hmm. So there are a number of different approaches to green roof policy. Indirect incentives, zoning codes, using the green area ratio, density bonuses, fast tracking the permitting, et cetera. Stormwater incentives, I think, are one of the most common. Direct financial incentives and regulation. And I'm going to go through examples of each of these in those various cities. And what we'll see is basically that the secret in Washington, D.C. is that they've used a mix of the top of all three of these top ones. So Washington, D.C., the first highest number of green roof square footage, and they do use, that is Seattle. Not Washington, D.C. Sorry. Seattle, though, number 10, does use an indirect incentive as well, and they use this green area factor. And there's a lot of construction. I don't know how much familiarity you all have, but the South Lake Union development in Seattle is a really good, I think, example of what we could look at where they have basically every building in that area is implementing a green roof because of
Do you
these
think
incentives.
Washington, D.C. is heavily weighted because of federal building retrofit?
No, I don't. As for the most part, what we've seen is in, well, it's a big mix, actually.
So is in Seattle, are those housing units, or are they a mix of housing and
They're a mix of housing and business. So there's, for example, there's the historic Laundry Blocks is a big multifamily residential building development. And then there are things like the Gates Foundation and the Amazon campus, and they're all kind of intermixed in that area.
Okay.
So Chicago, number 2, has similar incentives. Is everyone familiar with the green area ratio before I keep going? No? Okay. So I may defer to some experts on that, but basically the zoning code requires, depending on districts, a certain score in terms of amount of green infrastructure, and different types of green infrastructure are awarded different ratio point values. So something like a bioswale might get a 0.4 multiplied by the square footage. And in Washington, D.C. in particular, the extensive green roofs, or the sort of simple ones, get a multiplier of 0.6, and an intensive green roof gets a multiplier of 0.8, which is the same multiplier that they use for maintenance of mature tree canopy. So then there are stormwater incentives. So similar to here, Washington, D.C. has a very restrictive stormwater policy, and green roofs are included as one of the best practices. And there are very clear guidelines that they're using. And they also have a stormwater credit trading market. Chicago, very similar, and Nashville as well. And actually, is one thing to note that's kind of interesting is that Nashville is on this list, and the state of Tennessee is actually the only state, I believe, that has a statewide policy regarding green roofs and stormwater management. Then there are direct financial incentives. So here you see New York and Philadelphia coming into play. So they actually have specific programs where they give direct incentives per square foot for green roofs. But again, Washington, D.C., they've got kind of a smattering of everything. And then we have Toronto, which was number 4 on that list, and they actually have a direct, an outright requirement for green roofs. So they have a green roof bylaw that requires new building permit applicants to include a green roof, depending on how big their building is.
Has that hindered their growth at all from their or from a developer's perspective? Or do you know?
Not being a developer in Toronto, I can't really speak to that, but casual observation says no. I don't know if you have any experience with that at all. Do you?
No, I don't know. I mean, I would say the same thing, that I wouldn't expect that it would have changed it that much, but don't know if that's true or not.
Okay.
So Portland has a really strong start in the green roof policy and development, and basically we have a really good awareness of projects and community engagement, and I think the early founders of the green roof programs in Portland did a fabulous job of communicating their value, but we really are, I think, losing momentum a little bit. We also have great resources. Thanks to BS, we build green cities, Direct Stop Portland, and so on. And then we also have, and I think we can't forget this, Portland State is, one of the national leaders in terms of research in green building infrastructure, and we can really use them as a resource. And also, if we are the example of green building and can be sort of the local laboratory for that university, it helps keep our university at, the top-notch standing that they have. So with that, I'd like to talk about, what else can we do, implement a combination of incentives. I know there is a green area ratio zoning program or pilot program. And then we could write it into the zoning code and so on. So this is just sort of a first educational step. But I'd like to sort of open it up for questions and see what else we can discuss. And then end with a thank you and happy holidays and a picture of the apple roof being eaten by a reindeer.
Questions? What would be helpful to me is the people that have requirements. So that
like code examples.
Code examples. The response from the development community, because Catherine is kind of atypical, I think, of the development community. It costs too much, and the return on investment is too long. So I get Washington DC, they're government, and they can take a long view of that investment. But someone that's putting in their own money and expecting 5 years to get a return, it reduces the ROI for them. And I'm in it to make money, not if I can help the environment, great, but at the end of the day, it's about money. So how does the development community look at that requirement versus an incentive? And there's a significant difference to me, because we've got to convince the developers here that a requirement still gets them the return they need. And the other thing is, when I looked at many of the cities that said they got a Nashville got a $10 reduction, $10 from what? So is that 10% of the reduction of their sewer bill, or is that 50%? And then the other thing is just their approach appears to be, when you reduce dollars, at least in the language was up there, it's really given up foregone conclusion. They're trying to solve the problem of the initial investment, not the long-term return. And so when you think about that, solving that problem, it's a different solution than saying you get a reduction of 35%. It's about, how do you give me cash up front to solve $200,000 or $500,000? So what are the solutions that resolve around immediate ROI versus you save on the building 3 times, not putting in a roof? It's probably going to be owned maybe by 5 different people by that time.
Right. And that's part of the reason I declined to give a lot of examples from some of these studies. For example, the Walmart study, they've kind of convoluted. They've looked at, from my perspective of Walmart, what is my return? And they're taking into account incentives that are already there to reduce their upfront costs. And so it's very difficult to discern, to decouple the incentive programs that are pre-existing versus the inherent payback. But I think it's probably possible to look at some individual case studies, look at some examples of cities of comparable size and what have they done in more detail, like Nashville, for example. What are the details of their stormwater plan? And, in a particular building owner scenario, what decisions did they make given the pros and cons that they had?
Well, I think one way you do that is you ask the people who are going to buy the building to want it. And then they say, I want this thing because it's going to help me with my overall operating costs. So it's not so much about where you get the developer incented, it's you get the customer incented, and the developer has to respond.
You want to weigh in here, Tom, on anything?
Too much.
Okay.
Yes.
I have a question. You said we had a green area ratio pilot program. So maybe at some point we can hear about that. We don't have to tell us now, but.
Yeah, I would call it a pilot program. I don't know if it's truly a program yet, but we had one of our staff took the Seattle Green Area Factor program and applied it to 4 recent developments that occurred, just to kind of see whether those developments would have passed the Green Area Factor in Seattle. I believe one of them did, one of them came close, and 2 didn't. Is that right? Yeah, so it's just kind of give us an idea of what a development would look like if we were to have that here. So we haven't gone further than that to talk about whether we'd make changes to it, whether it would be that or not. But it's certainly something we're interested in looking at a little bit more, for sure. The idea that there really are these other benefits, quality landscape is very important, and the fact that it is weighted perhaps higher for a good reason. There is a habitat value to it. There are some climate change values to it that you wouldn't necessarily have with a green infrastructure facility on the ground.
And isn't the green factor incorporated at this point in the comp plan as a?
No, I believe it says to evaluate or look into.
Evaluate, that's right.
Something like that, yeah.
Enough said.
Oh, thank you. This discussion was pointing to, it's sort of, that's it's right there because we don't know. That we have this great stormwater manual. We got a lot of programs in place. So how does this leverage that? And so there's a piece of work to do. That's really what it's saying. It's not sort of a tepidness about green factor. It's mostly doing it right.
Well, and that's the function of this conversation really is so that we are a little better educated. So when we get into those conversations down the road, we are not starting from zero and we've got something to go on.
Yeah. I think one other interesting recent news tidbit, I don't know if maybe anybody else here has heard of it, but Cook County, the city of Chicago, recently is being sued by Farmers Insurance for lack of climate change preparedness and their recent bouts of flooding. So that's just another kind of interesting tidbit that basically, if we don't account for, say, stormwater, somebody's going to have to pay for it somewhere. And basically the insurance companies at least are starting to push back in this one particular case. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out because that would really push the impetus on dealing with stormwater and climate change to the cities and counties.
Well, it's 5.
Other questions? Other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate you putting the time and
Yeah,
effort
thank you.
bring this.
Appreciate the time and sorry for the delay in getting here. So, thank you.
Blame it on urban renewal areas.
Yeah. And to that end, before we get out of here, first I would like to thank Joe for a lot of hard work and working with the bureaus to get a housing policy in front of us and to get the urban renewal folks to come before us and get what we got. We tomorrow need to turn in our comments so Julie can put together a letter and we can get it to PDC. I'm scheduled to be at PDC on Thursday, and I will be at council the following week, the 17th, to deliver the message. So,
Would you like us to be there?
Teresa has offered to be at PDC, and so I will do that. But I want to thank you all for hanging in here, and I appreciate the statement. I think it's huge, and we will go forward from here, and hopefully we get some good results out of PDC, but certainly get Julie your comments. Thank you, Joe, for all your hard work, and thank all the staff and everybody for putting together everything, especially on the 2035 Central City plan. I think it worked out well. And Julie, thank you. And we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.